my first recollection of General Davis was when I was a teenager, and he was coaching my brother, and I was his manager, so I was his first base coach, and got to know him and Mrs. Davis through my family connections, and of course, Gil and Miles and Willa Kay were friends of ours, although we went to different schools. My dad was a civilian, so we went to the American School of Paris, and being military, all of the Davis kids went to the military dependent school called Paris American High School. So we were in different schools, but we saw each other, quite a bit as a result of the Little League affiliation. So, the first time, I would say that as a young man, I was impressed with General Davis's, then Colonel Davis, just quiet demeanor and patience and kind of soft-spoken voice, and his kind of wry sense of humor, but, he was always very much in control of himself and exuded a certain sense of confidence and conviction that made an impression on me even when I was, 15 years old, I guess I was at the time, 14 or 15. But the next time I see him, you'd have to fast forward the clock to May 28th, 1968, when I was a first lieutenant company commander outside of Quezon Combat Base in the northern part of South Vietnam, northwestern part. And we had just, a rather depleted company had just survived a pretty ferocious assault by a North Vietnamese battalion on a ridge that became known as Foxtrot Ridge outside of Quezon. And it was about a 18-hour ordeal throughout the night and into the morning. Towards the end of the morning, when the battle was over, the solitary UH-1 Echo helicopter landed in the LZ on the ridge, and this figure got off the helicopter. I had no idea who it was. As soon as he got off the helicopter and started walking up the hill towards my CP, I knew exactly who it was, and because I'd heard he'd just taken over the division. So he came out to see what was going on, gave us a pat on the back, and was a big boost to the morale of the troops, obviously, to see the commanding general out there. And I noticed he didn't wear a helmet, didn't wear a flak jacket, and he had a 45 caliber pistol on his hip, and that's about it. And his aide was Captain Dick Kemp at the time. Yeah, you didn't see many generals out. You didn't see too many. Well, of course, we didn't have too many generals, but you didn't see generals out where the platoons and the companies were, particularly in the areas where we were, because of the high probability of taking fire, and it was definitely what we called Indian country. From our position on Foxtrot Ridge, for instance, we could see into Cambodia. Laos, and there was, if you know the Vietnam War, you've probably heard about Quezon and the shelling of Quezon and the attempt by the North Vietnamese to turn it into an American Dien Bien Phu, which failed. But there was definitely an awful lot of artillery flying around and mortars and line outfits, North Vietnamese regulars, no Viet Cong, no civilians up in that area. So everything that moved was either friendly or enemy, and that was it. But so that's where I re-met General Davis, who was in a 2-star, commanding general of the 3rd Marine Division, and so we chatted, gave him a rundown on what had happened and how the fight went on, and he was very interested and very pleased with the results, and so he got in his helicopter and left, and I thought, well, that was it. And I had been over in Vietnam. I'd been in the field for about 10 months, I think, at that time, in a platoon or a company. I was was the company commander. And a few days later, Captain Camp or the battalion commander called me in, and he said something about General Davis wanted to know if I wanted to be his aide, and I said, well, he's already got one. And he said, no, Captain Camp is leaving. I said, well, I'll do what I'm told, but I really think we're short of officers, and I really think I should stay with the company and the battalion. And then a few days went by, and I got other conversations, and I got called in again, or maybe on the radio, and I was told that I was going to be his aide, and that I should do this, and this is very important. And so I said, okay. I got my orders, and I trained my relief for a few days, and packed up my gear, and went over and had a couple of days turnover with Dick Camp, and for the next, I think, about 2.5 months remaining on my tour, I was what I would call a combat aide to General Ray Davis. So when I say combat aide, I meant that simply because every single day of every week, he was in the field. I mean, he was in the field from sun up to sundown, flying around, landing, talking to troops, talking to commanders. He'd visit each regimental commander just about every day, give his orders. Spent very little time in the rear with the staff. Obviously, we'd come back in every night, and that's where he'd catch up with what's going on in the division CP. But he was very much a hands-on commander with a vision, a strategic vision, which was my first exposure to that kind of thinking, because I came from a pretty tactical battalion. But at the strategic level, for example, General Davis figured out that rather than have us grunts walking around waiting for the enemy to engage us, it's obvious that they had to have supply depots somewhere inside of South Vietnam. Otherwise, they couldn't sustain themselves. And so instead of walking around waiting for the enemy to engage us, we set out and oriented the whole reconnaissance effort towards finding their supply points and destroying them, capturing gear. And we found, and once we pivoted the whole division into that kind of mission, we started finding caches of weapons, of food, of clothing, of ammunition, supplies, hospitals, all camouflaged, all strategically located that could support enemy activity. And as we systematically destroyed those positions, the level of North Vietnamese presence in northern I Corps dwindled rapidly to almost nothing because they couldn't sustain themselves. He also pioneered a quick response force where he put a battalion on ready alert, and whenever there was a major engagement in the division AOR, he wanted to mobilize enough helicopters to lift an entire battalion to wherever the significant contact was. And that was another mobility change that dramatically enhanced our ability to fight and win in Northern I Corps.
So I'm curious, do you know what, being his aide there for 2.5 months, can you sort of look back and say, what was it that sort of, how do you think he came to those two particular conclusions, that was the course of action to take when no one else had been doing that, sir?
Well, I think, I think it's I mean, the man had tremendous field experience going all the way back to World War II in Korea. So he learned a little bit about thinking inside the enemy's head, and put himself in the position of an opposing commander who was trying to penetrate into South Vietnam without any airplanes, without really any trucks. Everything had to be hauled by hand, and so it made sense to him that there had to be supply depots, and rather than walking around sending his companies and battalions out looking for the enemy, which would engage you only on their terms, being able to reduce their amount of logistics that they had access to was a stroke of genius. And the QRF, the Quick Response Force, was another one. Because it really turned the tides on enemy presence. And he's also a big believer in the old adage, don't send a Marine where a bullet will do the job. I was with him one morning when we went to visit a battalion that was going to go into a particularly dangerous series of LZs the next day, and General Davis, in his calm voice, told the battalion commander, make sure you get a good prep of the LZs. And the next morning, there was some bad news in terms of some of the entries into the LZs. Some of the helicopters got shot up, and a lot of Marines were killed or wounded. And he flew back out the next day to the battalion commander and asked him how many rounds he fired to prepare the LZs. And I forget what the number was, but it wasn't adequate for General Davis, and he very calmly and coolly told the battalion commander that he was relieved. I think the battalion commander said I fired 150 rounds, and General Davis said we should have fired 1,500 rounds. You're relieved. Yeah, no, he was always in full control, and I admired that. The thing that people misunderstood a little bit about his calm, composed manner was that if they made a mistake, it was that they didn't listen exactly to what he said, because he always said it in the same even tone, and you had to really listen to understand that he looks like he's talking to you conversationally, but he's really giving you very specific instructions and suggestions, and you need to know how to pick up that tone and understand what he's saying. And most people did. I mean, don't get me wrong. His reputation was far and wide throughout the division. Everybody knew who Ray Davis was, so that wasn't a problem with, except for a few people. I'll give you another example of the way he thought. One day we were out flying around in this unarmed helicopter. We went up into the DMZ to look at a unit that was, try to find a unit that was operating up there, and on the way back we were flying pretty low towards some ridge lines, and we went over the ridge line at about 50 feet, and there were obviously some enemy forces below us because they emptied some AK-47s at us. You could hear the crack of them. And when we got back that night, to the headquarters at Dongha Combat Base, the fuselage on the general's airplane had been hit a few times. No real damage, but there were some holes in the fuselage. And that night, he called me into his little hooch, and he said, Jim, he said, I want you to know that I know what happened out there today. He said, I want you to know that I don't do these things haphazardly. I feel that the general should be seen by his troops and should be out there and should know what's going on. That's why I do the things I do. And he said, I want you to know that I'm not reckless. And I said, General, I am absolutely convinced that as a Medal of Honor recipient, you are probably immortal. My problem is I'm not sure about me. And he laughed. And we continued on, but we had a very good relationship, and I really